Now. Hello, John.
Hi, Fred. I'm John Ames, and on screen with me is Fred Davis, who is the creator of Awakening Clarity Now, an internet website devoted to non-dualism. I'm Fred's editor, and in my career as a writer, I've done a lot of interviewing. So Fred and I thought it might be interesting for him to post YouTubes with me asking questions to kind of change it a little bit from the type that he usually puts up. So, Fred, anything you want to say before we get started?
Yeah, I just want to introduce you from the standpoint that his name is John Ames, and he's a good friend as well as my editor, and he was a client prior to being my good friend and editor. And John is quite stable and awake, and he was a former English teacher, professor at college, and he's just a great guy. So then I'll do that, and we'll go on.
Well, thanks, Fred. I appreciate that. So, Fred, just because we're on good terms doesn't mean I'm going to throw you a lot of softball questions
Okay,
here.
that's good. I like that.
I'm going to ask you something that I hope will make you a little uncomfortable, and that is the question of what it means to be awake. A lot of teachers hop around this question. They don't want to answer it because it's irrational and so forth. And so I'm kind of interested not in what in your awakening, what not in what led up to it or what the circumstances of it were, but what about it impressed you? What was the sensation like? Because if you're waking other people up, then we have to talk really about your awakening, I
Yeah,
think.
that's fair enough. I mean, we got to get my credentials out there, and they're the only credentials I have. So what? Um, my first big awakening was in 2006. I was sitting in my living room, and I was sitting there as Fred Davis, the unit Fred Davis. I was not no awakeness there, and I was sitting in my chair, and I was sitting in Fred Davis's chair, and I was reading a book that Fred Davis owned, and I was trying mightily to wake up Fred Davis. That was my whole goal, and but I had
Well,
been.
wait a second, Fred. What did you imagine awakening was at that time?
I really didn't know, but if I had guessed, I would have. I mean, I had had a very clear, short, clear awakening back in '92. So 14 years in between the two, and in 1992, I knew that there was just one thing going on. The way that I described it in '92, the language was different than I might use now, but not very different. But the way that I talked about it coming away from it was I see that I am part of God, which tells me immediately that even though it was an authentic awakening, it wasn't as clear as what happened in 2006. Because that was the sense was, at least in the memory, that's what I came away with, was I am part of God. And so in 2006, as I had been trying to wake Fred up for a number of years now, and I had finally reached a desperate situation where life was awful and I didn't want to live anymore, but I had promised my then girlfriend, now wife, I wouldn't kill myself. And I'm sitting there in that chair and I'm reading a book, Pointers from Nisargadatta by Ramesh Balsekar. And Ramesh asked a question. And when he asked that question, out of the hundreds or thousands of questions that I had read, I don't even remember what the question was, but when he asked, oh, yes, I do remember, something to the effect of, when everything else has fallen away, what remains? It's a question I now ask people myself. And when he asked that question, the body just froze. And there was, and I've never heard this from another person, but this is what happened to me, is that right in the top of my head, there was something about the size and shape of a BB, round like a BB, and it just, but small, and it turned. I could feel it turn physically. I could feel it turn, or this it seemed physical. It turned 180 degrees, and it locked. And at the instant of that locking, and I'm guessing it was locking open, but I didn't know that at the time. I just heard the locking, and the instant that it locked, then I had one of these fairy tale spiritual awakenings that we love to read and hear about, hope we have, but which very few of us actually do have, and which are completely unnecessary. but I won't tell you that they're not a lot of fun.
So describe what it was about. Now, a lot of teachers would say, well, you had an experience and it was an arising like every other arising.
That's true.
So the question is, where did the sensation of consciousness come into this, if that's the crucial element?
The best way that I can describe this is that I said, and I came away from both awakenings saying the same thing, although it was, if anything, it was more apparent in '92. But it was as if my head exploded. It's just telling you the way it was seen from here, and I can tell you how it's seen as a teacher later. But you're describing it pretty well. So it was as if my head exploded, and at that point, there was no "I am part of God" as there had been in '92. If there was that in '92, that's what memory told me later. But that experience in 2006 was, Fred Davis been trying to wake up Fred Davis. The first thing that popped in my head was, oh, I'm not Fred Davis after all. That's the first seeing, is that there was, because what had happened here, it's the opposite of what we think. It's 180 degrees from what we think. Everything in spirituality that I've discovered is 180 degrees from the way that we think it is, and we can't actually trick around to undo that 180 until we just wake up. And what Fred had been just dying to wake up to the truth of the universe, the truth of God, the truth of whatever you want to call it, but just the truth. Fred had been and he had some kind of idea that it meant some kind of otherworldly experience of that meant like pretty much a constant orgasm was what I was looking for. Constant orgasm where there were no problems. That's what I was looking for. It's not what I got. There was that orgasmic experience at that time, and quite frankly, I mean, it was very, very, very pleasant. Pleasant doesn't describe it. Wonderful, blissful, whatever you want to say. But
well, wait a second. Let's just backtrack for a second. When you say it was pleasant, when you say it was orgasmic, when you say, what is there that you can say about it? That was there some kind of release? Was there a sense that you had no problems anymore? Or what was it that made it so spectacular?
Well, first thing I have to say is that for me at that time, and again, this is not the norm necessarily, it's not the norm, period, but it's what happened with me. And what happened with me at that time was that physically there was like just an explosion of energy. And it was just where there was nothing but energy. And there was just this, but the body was still there, and the body was just, oh my God, the body just felt literally like an orgasm or something, where it's just an intensity, a pleasure that can't really be put into words. There was tremendous physical pleasure, but that exploding that went into my head, that started happening in the head, just continued until I recognized, when like I say, the first thing was I'm not Fred Davis after all, and then I noticed, I'm this. What I noticed is that what I was, these are all the early things that are popping through my head. I can't know what was first, second, and third that came to my head, but I'll report what came to my head in very, very rapid order. The first thing I remember was realizing, oh my God, why didn't they tell me it was a verb? Because what I was experiencing is I was experiencing myself as the entire pulsing planet, the entire pulsing, energized universe without division, just without separate, just I am this. There's only this, and I'm it. And it was just this, oh my God. So the real thing that hit in I keep saying that now, but my real thing that hit in my head, why didn't they tell me I was a verb? Because that's the way that I was experiencing things. I had thought that awakening meant that the Fred unit was going to go from this place to some other place. And what awakening was that the Fred unit, at least briefly, fell away, and I just experienced myself as the entire universe.
Well, let me ask you one thing. Were your mental faculties in place at this time?
Yeah, and I mean, I hadn't been drinking for years. I didn't use drugs. I didn't even smoke. I had been under a lot of stress, but there's no reason to, the other thing is that honestly, that question can only come from outside of awakeness, because the thing to recognize from my awakening or any other that I've seen is that it is immediately self-confirming. As I recall, you had a day in a grocery store where you wrote back to me, and there was no questioning, no nothing. I got it. This is it. And you'd seen it. You already had it. You were already awake, but you had an experience, and that experience was self-confirming. You don't need anybody to tell you this is awakening anymore, or that if you've been in this field, you don't need anybody to tell you this is awakening or this is enlightenment any more than I need my wife now to tell me that I'm talking to John, that I'm alive and talking to John.
But what I really was trying to get at was, during this experience, did you have a sense of comprehension?
Oh yes. I mean, there was like this huge instantaneous download, and I knew the thought that would have gone through the head probably was that, is that I know everything. I mean, that's probably what would have, but it wouldn't have gone through like that, because to be honest with you, there was barely even an I there. It was just like, there was an I there, but it was just not real marked. And there was nothing but comprehension. That's the better way to put it. It wasn't there. There wasn't a Fred there, certainly, who was getting any of this. There wasn't there wasn't really a sense of an I now get it. It was just very much a comprehension that I am it. And so it's not like all of my questions, my egoic questions about awakening and enlightenment and how the world works and how the universe works, it's not like all of those were answered right at once. It's just that those questions were seen to be irrelevant. They were moot questions.
Well, what about your sensory input at that time? You say that there was a sense of expansion, but was there a visual impression that you had?
Yeah, the visual impression that I had at that moment, there was such expansion that the only way I think that my mind could take that in, I'm not suggesting this is real. The mind just may have done this as to make it understandable to me, was that I was all trees and wind, big blowing trees and wind. In other words, there was nothing static. Everything was moving, and I was that everything. And of course, I can say that today. I am that everything, and everything is moving.
When you say everything, what things are you referring to?
I'm referring to manifestation.
Mm-hmm. So you were in a room, and you had a sense that the room was in motion or vibrating in some way.
No, I lost the room completely.
Okay.
When that head explosion took place, and then very quickly the whole thing, it was, again, this is that fairy tale thing, but it was like, the bright white light or whatever. It was just like light. It just went out, and then as this expansion just kept going, there was at some point, I think the mind may have taken over and tried to explain it or something, from being trees and wind. In other words, just being way out there, not very, very nebulous, not anything. But when I say trees and wind, it was more like earth and wind, but trees on the earth, the way that trees move. So that energetic movement was much the way like trees would move in the wind. And I think, I think that's closer to that experience. Not literally trees and wind, but that I was this thing, this motion, that this energy that shows up like the way that wind does in trees, in tall trees.
Well, were you perceiving this from a perspective of some sort? Now you're looking out of your eyes, but what sort of perspective was?
There was no perspective of a unit here at all. There was I'm talking about the first explosive bit. I don't know how long that lasted. I would probably wasn't very long, but there's no way for me to put a time on it. But there was no experience of a unit. There was no experience of a Fred or Fredness. There was no sense of having broken through. Not initially. When there was the sense, when a light sense of a more immediate I returned, that's when came the thought. One of the thoughts was that, why didn't they tell me I was a verb, or it was a verb is the way I thought about it at the time. Why didn't they tell me it was a verb? And I would now say I am a verb, but that's the way it was. Again, it takes seconds for ego to come in and start to rebuild and make sense of all this. So even though you're still brightly awake, you're not alone anymore. You got the ego is coming in to rebuild. The next thing I noticed was that all of the problems I had been hoping, I had read that they wouldn't be fixed by enlightenment, but I was convinced I was as always, that I was the exception to the rule. And I had expected a bunch of problems to either be fixed or to get to the point where I didn't care or whatever. And hopefully I'd be so awake that people would notice me and they'd let me off the hook for everything and treat me with deference and everything the way I always thought they should have anyway. And so what happened was, where were we, John? I will lose this thing, so I get lost.
Well, I think you were about to say that your ego was sort of rebuilding, and you were reinterpreting.
Yes. The next thing I noticed was that those problems that I had been hoping would go away didn't, but I did notice they were Fred's. And with noticing that those were not my problems, that those were just, I can't even say that there was the recognition that they weren't problems. There wasn't any feeling like that at all. There was just that what I saw was, oh, that's all Fred's stuff, and which had nothing to do with me. So I was like at perfect ease, and I can't tell you how after years of anxiety, because all this revolved around a trial and everything else, the years of anxiety to suddenly realize that ultimately it's all okay. Ultimately, it's all okay. It's just that was my experience. That was not my experience. That was my knowing, was that it's all okay, and that not all this stuff had been fixed. Now there were, quote, problems I had that did fall away immediately because they were attached to questions like, what's Fred gonna do next and stuff. And in the seeing that there's no Fred, all of that stuff just drops away, at least briefly. It did for me, at least briefly. Awakening, I just want to make clear, I'm describing what occurred here through this unit. It occurs differently for everybody, and of the hundreds and hundreds of people that I've had wake up with me, not one of them has had a duplicate experience of this. I have had people who have also had these big explosive experiences, but I've had them have it when they were with me, but not quite like mine. There are 7 billion units on the planet, and if all of them woke up simultaneously right now, there would be it would be like the Tower of Babel. There would be 7 billion different descriptions of what enlightenment is like. There'd be a lot of common ground there, but it's not just, we need not think that we're going to have an awakening like Eckhart or Byron Katie or Adyashanti or all these other famous awakenings, or even one that's not so famous like mine. That may occur to us, and it may not. Holding out for that experience is the reason that most people don't wake up, because they won't accept that, they won't tell themselves the truth about the truth.
Well, after this experience, then there was a bit of a closing down. Is that right? And how would you express the difference between what was going on in Fred Davis's mind before this and after this? In other words, was there a different thought process? You still think, you still deal with things as Fred Davis. So what's the difference between then and now from your perspective?
So between then and now, or right
between prior
before the awakening to right after the awakening?
Yes, I mean let's just go to what you were when you were sitting there prior to this BB turning around in the top of your head.
Okay.
What was your mentality like at that time?
It was like everybody who's watching this who hasn't had an awakening. That's the easiest way to describe it. If you've not had an awakening, then my experience was exactly like yours. And my experience was that I'm a guy. I'm on a rough and tumble planet, and things are not going my way, and they should be. And the people are not doing what I want them to do, and they should be. And just like, this guy's driving too slow. I mean, is he driving too slow? No, he's driving the way he's driving. But from a Fred unit, he's driving too damn slow. So get him off the road. So there is the idea that I had been studying spirituality for years. I had had a very clear awakening, short one, 14 years before. Nonetheless, my overwhelming belief is that there's this which I can see, feel, hear, and touch, and enlightenment is somehow there's a reorientation of all of this, so that my experience, the experience of life is going to be dramatically different in a visual, sensory way. And what I can tell you is that in the long run, there may be that in the short run. There was that for me. But in the long run, there is almost a visual component to it, in the sense that, like right now, as I look around here, what I see oneness. That's all I see. I see myself. I'm talking to myself. I know that. I call myself John over there, but it's just the same thing. The computer itself is me. I see oneness. That's all I can see. Simultaneous to that, let me recap it and say that I am not looking at sameness. It's not sameness. We confuse oneness with sameness. We think, well, I'm still seeing pictures and trees, and in this case, lights and books. But, and if I was awake, I wouldn't be seeing that. I'd be seeing the other oneness, the other reality, the cool reality, not this reality, because I'm trying to get out of this reality. And this is the reason that we don't wake up, is that oneness is engaged as a seeker. Oneness is engaged in looking for the other oneness. And see, there's just one. It's not, and we think, because oneness, we think we want the non-dual experience, but we're actually already in the non-dual experience. Anybody who is watching this video and thinks they would like to have an altered state is already in an altered state. Because awakeness, living in awakeness, living as awakeness, is not an altered state at all. This is the natural state. This is your natural state. This is your natural birthright, is to live as things are, to live as oneness. So, but not as sameness, but as oneness. I mean, if you want to experience yourself as sameness, all you have to do is notice that you're also the void. And then you've got everything. You're oneness indeed, but it's all the same. In manifestation, it's all you, but there's diversity. That's the difference. And we're always trying to overcome, as seekers, I was always trying to overcome this diversity. Like I should be seeing, when they tell me the face of God, I should be seeing, but I noticed when they said that, that everywhere I looked, somebody, they have a spiritual experience, they report spiritual awakening, they report everywhere I looked, I saw the face of God. And I'm thinking, wow, that must be really something. I mean, and in my mind, I'm thinking, I never really thought about what that meant. See, I was thinking that it must mean like God was going to be on like 1,000 TV sets or something, looking at me from every direction. And all I could see would be the face of God, or there'd be one big, huge, drawn out face of God or something like that. I didn't understand. This is what I mean by, why didn't they tell me it was a verb? Because it's actually recognizing that I don't need to look for the face of God because I'm already looking at it, because I'm already it. There's nothing to see. People who say I cannot discover I can't find my true nature. That's not so. You can't find anything else. There's nothing but your true nature and the belief that there is something other than your true nature.
Well, what about your thought process as compared to before and after? Now, my guess is that now you sense or have a feeling that thoughts just bubble up.
Yes.
What did you think was happening prior to that experience?
I thought I was thinking. I thought all of it. I thought that, number one, the first thing is I thought the world was happening to me. Right? Because I'm over here, the world's out there, and the world is happening to me. When the truth is understood, recognize the world, that the manifestation is happening for me, but none of it's happening to me. I thought that the voice in the head that says, this is good, this is bad, do this, don't do that, they should be doing this, all of that, I thought that was actually me. I thought that voice was important. I had allowed it to run my life, all of my life. And I was like 51, 52 when I woke up, something like that. So, I mean, it had quite a long run. And recognizing that all of these thoughts just arise, meaning there's no owner to them. That's a great practice that you can take on, because you can say, because somebody might be out there right now saying, oh, I'm on the edge of it. I got to get almost what he's saying. I'm just right there. So let me ask you this. Who is it that's thinking I'm right on the edge of it? Can you find an owner to that thought? I don't think you can. You can, and the important thing is not to look and not find it one time, but to look and not find it hundreds or thousands of times. Hit the wall, hit the wall, hit the wall. See that there's no thinker. See that there's no doer. Talking about enlightenment doesn't work very well at all. What I do in awakening sessions is show and tell. I'm not trying to promote awakening sessions. I'm just saying that what I do is show and tell. It's the show and tell that steps outside of language, and that's why they're so effective. So it is, I thought I was the thinker of these thoughts. What I noticed later was that I am this, was that these thoughts are not mine. And the power that we learn is that if these thoughts are not mine, is it actually important that I believe them? See, this idea that I've almost got it. Who's thinking that? I thought it for years. I mean, John, if you and I today were to go out and rent a football stadium and fill it full of 100,000 dedicated seekers, I mean enthusiastic seekers, people who might have been on the trail for a week or 40 years, it doesn't make any difference, but they're all in the thick of it. And we fill that full, and then I come out and I tell everybody, okay, everybody, I've got a special teaching for you tonight. That's the good news. The less than good news is that it's not for all of you. This teaching that I have tonight is actually only for those of you who feel like enlightenment is right around the corner. So, given that that's the ground rules, I'd like just for the people who think that enlightenment is right around the corner to please raise your hand. And John, when I say that, 100,000 hands will go up, because I can still remember the first day I ever meditated, and I figured I'll be awake in about an hour. I mean, I didn't think like that, but I mean, it was this, but there was always this sense that enlightenment is right there. I just got it because I hear it's a gateless gate, and it is always right there. But the one who thinks that something other than what's right here has to occur, that's actually our obstacle to waking up to the truth. The truth is, this is it. Here it is. One thing.
Well, it is frustrating for people when one says that it's all one, and then one says there's a problem guy, Fred. You know, so how does that get reconciled anyway?
So let me say first that I was a seeker for 24 years, and I get it. There's not much turmoil that a seeker can be in that I haven't been through. I get it. I never downplay that. The first time anybody ever told me you're already awake, it pissed me off because I knew he was wrong, and I knew why would he even be bothered to be so unhelpful. So this sense that is that there is only one thing going on from the universal view, or that we normally call that the absolute, but I reserve that for something else now generally. So I'll call it the universal view. From the universal view, from the broadest view, there's just this. And it is this seeing that people have where they move from I am the guy stuck in relativity to now, oh, I am the vastness. I see, I'm the vastness. And none of that stuff over, because think about it, when I was in relativity, what mattered was relativity. And that maybe spiritual thing, I mean, I didn't care. It really, none of that really mattered. It was because, I need another drink. And my focus was on relativity. Now I've had an awakening. There has been an awakening. And my view is that there's just this awakeness. There's just this vastness. There's only this. And so all of this stuff, again, there's who cares about any of those problems? They're Fred's. I don't care about Fred or Fred's problems or and there's nothing that I can care about. There's nothing to care about. There's no one home, nothing to do, all of this. That's a view. And that's when we just swapped views. We've gone from one side of the circle to the other. What happens is that, and there's a lot of non-dual teaching that comes from that view. And it's that view, either view, relativity or the universal, either view is true as far as it goes. Neither one goes far enough. Because if I am living my life in the delusion that I am just this little man, then I am in Maya. I'm just living in a dream. That's true. If I conversely, after an awakening, I'm now experiencing myself as only being awakeness, as just being the vastness, and that's all there is, I'm now living in just the flip side of this. I'm living on the other side. I'm now living the yang to the yin, or vice versa. So what I actually am is oneness. And oneness means I'm both. I'm the whole thing. And the whole thing, the non-dual view, is seeing both sides simultaneously. It's not that the non-dual view is like, oh, see, there's relativity and there's absolutism. There's a lot of absolutism taught as non-duality, and it's just simply not. It's the view, it's the understanding that there is a relative view and that there is a universal view. And those views do not, what you see in one view does not migrate to the other. What I see from the universal view will not apply on the relative plane. And this is what screws us up, because we wake up and we haven't had this kind of orientation, and there's this sense that, oh, I see, none of this actually matters. None of this counts. I mean, this is just, golly, this is just nothing. And all the juice is taken out of relativity without it really being replaced, because now the vastness becomes what is sometimes described as the desert, where all I've done is seen what I'm not. I've seen that I'm not that human being. And I see that what I am is just this empty whatever it is. Non-duality is seeing that the relative view exists, and that the universal view exists, and that what I am is that which sees both, which sees both experiences or holds both experiences simultaneously. And that's the reason that there's wisdom involved, is that you can see it from the human point of view and you can see it from the universal view. And that gives you a more full view, always going to be limited because it's coming through a human being, but it still gives you a much more full view that of truth. You get much closer to the truth. I don't want to suggest that anything that I say is the truth. It's not. It can't be put in language. And I don't want to suggest that what I can see is the truth. I will tell you it's as close as a unit can get. What I see has to still filter through the remaining Fredness before it gets to actual clarity. And when actual clarity expresses itself, it has to work itself through this Fredness before it ever hits you. Then it has to work itself through Johnness before it hits itself again. So there are all these filters, if you will. And seeing things as they are is being able to recognize the filters too. And being able to recognize, okay, I'm seeing from the relative, I'm seeing from the absolute view or the universal view. And what I'm seeing from the universal view is that there can't be any free will because there's no one here to have free will. So it's a moot question. That whole thing philosophers have been arguing about for thousands of years. Do we have free will or do we not have free will? It is in the highest seeing, it's a moot point because there's no one here to either have free will or not have free will. Simultaneously, I notice that it looks to me like the Fred unit can pick this up and show it to a John unit willfully. The experience through this unit is that there is free will. And on the relative level, there is free will. It is here.
Well, I've heard people say that what you have when you pick up the yin-yang symbol and say that I've done that is simply a thought that emerges after the fact, proclaiming that you had a choice to do it or not, or that somehow you acted on it.
Yes.
So how do you reconcile an objection, you might say, of that sort?
That doesn't sound like an objection. That sounds to me like exactly what I'm talking about, really, is that there is because when I say that there is free will, what I mean is actually there is the experience of free will. Is that the Fred unit has the experience of free will. What you're talking about is a word, I can't remember, it's post something, but it means like after the fact. And there's some scientific research. I'm not a scientist, but I know there is some, and all of these scientists disagree, but there's some scientific research that shows that actually our body moves first, and that that milliseconds after the body starts to move, the brain begins to operate to tell a story about why it's moving. And there's the appearance to the mind that I'm doing this. But in fact, it's all operating through us. But we don't want to accept that everything here is already predetermined and carved in stone, because that's what we get the idea of this, is that it's predetermined and carved in stone, and it's absolutely not the truth. The fact is that everything is arising spontaneously. It's all arising spontaneously, but it's arising spontaneously at the same time, and everything is the cause of everything else. There's no cause, there's no effect other than in relativity. But the relativity it's an illusion, granted. I mean, it's an illusion. We can explore things to help us see that this is an illusion. Who cares? I mean, that's like, James Thurber wrote a book called, Is Sex Really Necessary? Do we care? I mean, right? I mean, is that really a valid point that someone wants to worry about? I mean, it's cool. And so is this, the experience of life is tremendous. Who wants to miss it? I have a new puppy. I mean, it's like, my God, and it has no brain whatsoever, but it is totally cute and totally alive. I'm not looking to transcend the experience of this new puppy. I'm not looking to somehow get over the fact that this unit loves its wife, right? I love my wife. I mean, that I'm not trying to get over Betsy. I'm not trying to get around that. I'm not trying to transcend it. I'm not trying to deny it. What I'm trying to do is to really wake up, not tell myself I'm really wake up to where I can get to a point where either immediately or in short order, all of this, everything in time, that I can accept this arising, because that's the only arising we ever have to accept is this one, and get to the point where I can accept this arising regardless of the content.
Well, you've had some opportunities to do that. How do you know when you're not succeeding?
So it can happen now. There can be an awake. There was a flap around me last fall, and not to go into it, but I wasn't awake to that arising, and when it occurred, it was like, I mean, initially I was awake to it. I looked at Betsy and I said, well, we don't actually know that this isn't the best thing that ever happened to us. That's awakeness. That's awakeness seeing it, and it's seeing things as they are. It's not taking sides. It's not being judgmental. But as this thing built momentum and the unit got pounded and pounded and pounded, then the unit became overwhelmed, and which means that there was never any point where I felt like I don't know what I am, and so I need to go seek. But there was a sense that this shouldn't be, and that's not coming from awakeness. The simple noticing that this shouldn't be means I'm not coming from pure awakeness. I may be essentially awake, but I'm not clear at that moment. And what I had to do was what I tell people to do now when they're in early isolation is that it was so heavy and so dense that what I had to do was I would go downstairs and sit in my living room, and I would look around and I would go, and I just tell myself the truth. And the truth was, I don't actually, I would tell myself a deeper truth than I usually teach, which is, none of this is actually happening. And it's, you're taking your, and here's what I would teach is that you're taking your thoughts seriously. That's what happens. Because the difference between being awake and between a body functioning as conscious awakeness and a body functioning with conscious awakeness coming through this body or not, so that there's just unconscious awakeness. You're nothing but awakeness, two states of awakeness, conscious and unconscious. So when there is just when it becomes overwhelmed, when the situation becomes overwhelming, then we revert. It's just like you take so many raindrops and then the whole damn thing is wet. And it reached the point where where the unit, or whatever you want to call it, awakeness through the unit, the clarity that was here, that's what we're really talking about, where the clarity that was here had taken all that it could take and stay clear. But I didn't forget who I was. I simply moved the unit downstairs so that the clarity could catch up post-event, could catch up with it. And would do this a couple of times a day and be able to see, oh, I see. And I could see that this should be happening. How do I know it should be happening? Because it is happening.
How would you answer someone who suggested that that's simply a form of denial?
Well, it can be thought of as a form of denial, certainly.
I'm in pain, but it doesn't matter.
No. I'm not saying it doesn't matter.
No. But I mean, from the taking the point of view of someone who was a psychologist, for example, or someone like that might say, well, what Fred has done is create a defense mechanism.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that I have more psychologists than any other profession who are clients. I am chock full of, if psychologists disappear, if they get taken in the rapture tomorrow and they just take the psychologist, I'm out of business. So let me tell you how this plays out in practicality. give you an actual example instead of a dreamed up notion, is that I have a client in Columbia, South America. I'm in Columbia, South Carolina. He is in Columbia, South America. And he had written me, this is over a year ago, and wanted to do, and he bought a package. He wanted to do an awakening session and some clarity sessions. And so I did that. So when the first time that I called him, like I did you today, first time I called him and the Skype screen opened up, I saw a guy in his bed. And Eduardo was, no, excuse me, Eduardo was another guy. This was Frederick. And sorry, Frederick. And Frederick, I recognized, was at least a paraplegic, and it turned out he was a quadriplegic. And he had been a very robust man, had to be pretty well-to-do. He had been a mountain climber, and he'd had an accident on his mountain climb and had broken his back. And he had, had as a result had been a quadriplegic for the last like 20-something years. And what's going through this guy's mind? He could move his arms, but only like this, without, just almost like flippers. So what is going through that guy's mind? What's the story there? Well, the story starts with, the ground zero for that story is this shouldn't be. I shouldn't be a quadriplegic. So what I had to do, and I had to do it very gently, but I didn't stay gentle. I had to get very hard with him, and it was a very nice guy, and I hated it. But he had asked me to help him wake up. He didn't ask me how I was going to do that. He just asked me to help him wake up. And until he told me to stop and click off, I was going to do whatever it took. And so I told him, I said, listen, let me tell you something from a human perspective. I completely get it. I do. Is that you're in this awful situation. It's a terrible story. And I have to tell you, quite frankly, as terrible a story as it is, I'm glad it's your story and not my story. I don't want that story. My story is not perfect either, but yours is by far worse than my story. No question about it. So I completely get it, as much as I can get it while not being a quadriplegic. I completely get it, and I'm very, very sorry for your situation. And if I get on board with you about the fact that this shouldn't have happened to my good friend Frederick, the victim, I will be of absolutely no use to you. So the first thing we have got to understand is that, do we know, can we just question it? Do we know that you're actually not supposed to be a quadriplegic? Is that true? You're not supposed to be a quadriplegic? And of course it's true, but eventually we broke through to where you could see, well, I can see that there's no evidence that I shouldn't be a quadriplegic because I noticed I am a quadriplegic. There's no evidence that I shouldn't be sitting here with my broken back because I am. There's no evidence I shouldn't have fallen on the mountain because I did. And on and on and on. And we just had to get down to this guy had bed sores. This is a truly horrific human experience. And I felt it very deeply. Very deeply. But I could not get on. He hadn't asked me to make him feel better. He had asked me to wake him up. And I told him very early on, you need to decide, after I gave him that speech, you need to decide if what you want is comfort or truth. Because if you want truth, you've got the right man on Skype with you. If you want comfort, I'm not the right guy. Because I ain't going to do anything but tell you the truth. Whether you want to believe it or not, that's not my job. My job is to offer the truth to you. My job is to give you the opportunity to wake up. Whether you do or do not want to tell your truth is none of my business. If you want to wake up, that's great. Most people do. I can certainly see where, from your perspective, it may be more important for you to hang on to that victim story than it is for you to wake up. It may be that you feel like it's more important for you to be right, that you should not be paralyzed, than it is for you to be awake. And if so, I get all that. But if you choose to go forward, the gloves are off. You're supposed to be paralyzed because you are. There's no evidence to the contrary. When we can say supposed, well, it's not like it's supposed to be in the way that we normally think. What I'm saying is that you are paralyzed. That's all I'm saying, is that it is what it is. See, we take that common phrase, it is what it is, and we've turned it into a throwaway everyday phrase so that because it's so that we don't actually have to pay attention to what it's saying. It's actually a deep spiritual truth. It is what it is, and that means this whole planet, this whole experience of relativity, it is what it is. And this thing, because this guy's problem is not that he's a quadriplegic. This guy's problem is that he thinks he's a guy who's paralyzed. Separation is his problem. And separation takes place if I'm the victim, I'm separated. If I'm right, I'm separated. If I can understand that actually I'm not. How can I be a victim when I'm actually not? And I recognize that there was no Fred Davis after all. I wasn't Fred Davis after. Once there's no Fred Davis, then whatever Fred Davis is suffering immediately becomes less important. The greater seeing there is to understand that things are as they are, and that I'm not actually Fred Davis. I am the one thing going, or Frederick in Columbia, South America. I'm not Frederick. I'm having a Frederick experience. Because when we wake up or we have a big insight, what we think is that this unit, the Fred unit, oh man, I just had a big insight. I just woke up. Because that's what memory will always tell us. That's the reason I can't be sure of that 1992 experience. Because I know what memory tells me, but memory doesn't serve very well in references to awakening, because memory cannot hold awakening. Mind cannot hold awakening. It can only behold awakening. So when it's this, but since there's no Fred here, and there is not, I have looked. I don't look anymore, but I did look for 24 years. There's no Fred here. No, there are rumors of Fred, but there's no Fred. In the absence of a Fred, can there somehow now be a Fred who's having a clear moment? If there's no Fred, can there be a Fred who's waking up? Can there be a Fred who woke up? Can there be a Fred who's just had a key spiritual insight? No. That's what it feels like. That's what in memory, that's what it feels. It doesn't feel like that at the time. It's at the time, it's very, if it's an authentic non-dual experience, it's just, I don't care if it's seen for half a second. It makes no difference. If it's seen, the truth that people don't want to tell themselves is that there's no Fred. That's what I can't get people to tell them. The few people that I don't wake up, that's where they get stuck. They can't overcome that. So what I want you to notice is that when we have these insights, when we have these breakthroughs, when we have a spiritual awakening, what's actually happening is that awakeness itself is having a Fred-free moment. That's what's happening.
That sounds great, Fred. And we're at an hour now. I think I heard your thing go off, which is probably enough for any YouTube video.
I agree. Thank you very much. Thanks for keeping me for an hour, because you've seen this thing. You get it wound up, it's hard to shut it down.
Well, as always, Fred, you're entertaining and interesting to listen to.
And I thank you very much, and really I appreciate your time with this, your interest with this. Appreciate everything you're doing with this teaching, and I appreciate you're asking me real questions instead of softball. And we'll do this again soon, okay?
All right, then.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
And I will